Greetings and welcome back to the Old Ways Rising Farm YouTube channel, where we are continuing our journey towards making our canvas backpacks. So this is our own original design. It's kind of a composite of several previous designs. But there's two components of this that are not 100% unique, but are very different from most of the sewing patterns that you're gonna see, right? If you're just going to a fabric shop and picking up a sewing pattern, there's stuff in here that you're not going to see in those. These two things are, firstly, but in no particular order, we have a curved backstay. Okay. Now this curved backstay is wood, and if I pull it out of its little holdy pocket, that's the technical term, the holdy pocket, there's our piece. Okay. So we need to make this, and we're going to make this by steam bending. I've made mine from ash because I have a stash of ash from right when all the ash trees were dying. So I was able to lay up a good load of it. And it's a really nice steam bending wood. Now you can use oak, you can use hickory, you could use cedar, you can use any of the good steam bending wood. So whatever you have access to that will steam bend well, use it. But in order to steam bend it, we need a frame upon which to clamp it so it can dry nicely, okay, and keep its shape. Dry and cool and keep its shape. So we need to make this. We're going to talk about these things in this video. And the other aspect of this that is a little bit unique-ish is the internal rope harness. Now, sewing an internal rope harness into a canvas product is not unique, but it goes back to the days of the wooden sailing ships and hasn't really been all that prominent since then. Okay, so we're digging back into some maritime canvas work here and using a rope harness to define, if I could tuck this under my chin, define the volume of our pack. Okay. So as you can see in this back panel, we've hemmed the rope right into the canvas. So the rope will take the weight of the contents of the pack, and the canvas is kind of hanging out for the ride. Okay, and just providing a container volume into which it can sit. But we're distributing all of that weight to this piece of rope. And in order to form this rope harness, we are using the long splice, which is shown right here, and we're using the chain eye splice, which is shown here. Again, both of these go back to the days of the wooden sailing ships. The long splice is the classic splice used for rope that needed to pass through a pulley because it does not thicken the rope to any substantial degree. Okay, so it'll pass through a pulley sheave without problem. And the same is true for the chain eye splice. The typical sailor's eye splice does double the thickness of the rope right below here. And if you're pulling a chain through, if you're using a rope as a lead to get a chain up through a pulley system and you don't want it to jam, you use the chain eye splice because just like the long splice, it does not swell the rope. Okay? And we want a loop connection so that we can adjust it in the sewing process and move things around. But we don't want to do that with a knot or with a thick splice because it would just... We're going to have this rope as several thicknesses of canvas and in some places also some leather pads. So, yeah, we need to watch thickness, okay? We can drive a sail needle through a big pile of thickness, but we don't want to go overboard. So every spot where we can save a little bit of thickness, it's important to do so. So this is the second thing I'm going to show you in this video, how to make this rope harness. Now, I do want to emphasize this is the volume of the pack. We are not using this narrow rope for a shoulder strap. We are using this nice wide 2.5 inch cotton material for this webbing for our shoulder strap, right? So that will go here, and this will be very easy to put a pad on if you choose to, or just use as is if you choose to. So this is the shoulder strap. We're not making a harness out of this rough, nasty, thin rope that's going to touch the body. This is just supporting the volume of the pack. So, if you're enjoying this and you're enjoying this canvas pack build, come along and I'll show you how to make these couple of special pieces. The next thing we want to make is the curved stay for the back support of this pack. Now before we do a steam bend curve, we need a mold around which we form it. And these are the two that I've made through the prototyping process. Okay, you can see if I put this on here, it was steam bent and fits around. Okay, so then you just clamp it up and let it dry. Now, I don't need any more of these since I've already made two, so I'm going to show you how to make it just by doing one of these holes as a demonstration. This is the cardboard mock-up that I made in the prototyping process, but this is the nice full pattern, okay, that I'm making for the pattern set that's going to go along with this pack on the Patreon. So you get yourself a piece of wood that can accommodate this design. Make sure you have a little bit of extra, width both at the top and at the bottom. Okay, but it can be any old piece of scrap wood, as you can see from my any old piece of scrap wood, right? But I have some thickness here and here as well as up at the top. Okay, because you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on it, and you don't want to split bits off. This is just a bit of a hemlock board that I had sitting around, and it's really, really splitty wood. Okay, so you'll get your piece of wood, you'll print out your pattern, you'll tape the two sheets together, okay, and then cut it out so you have something to trace on. If you're comfortable just tracing around printer paper, go for it. If you want something more substantial, you can always put like a spray adhesive on the back of the pattern, glue it to a piece of cardboard, and then you'll have something more substantial. Okay. So I just have a even scrubbier scrap here. But I neglected a pencil. There's a pencil. Okay. So I have an even scrubbier scrap here, and I'm just going to kind of haphazardly just trace a couple of these. You get the idea. Okay. And then after we have traced those, right, this is the portions which stick up are left, and the portions which come down are what we're going to cut away. Okay. So I want to mark the center of that. So I'm just going to take something to use as a straight edge and mark corner to corner. Okay. And then this is the material to be removed. Okay. So I'm going to go take a 1-inch spade bit on the drill press, drill out most of that material, and then we'll talk about chopping the square hole. Here we are, we have drilled out our hole just with a simple spade bit, Forstner bit, any old big bit that you want to use is the right bit to drill that hole out. Now remember, this is rough and ready woodworking. We're trying to get a shape that we can clamp a thing to. This ain't a kitchen table, it doesn't have to be pretty. Okay, so this is also a really good opportunity to practice up on your, mortise and tenon chopping skills. So we have our square piece. Now I'm using just a little section cut off of a 1x1 rough cut sticker that's just out of our lumber pile. So it's not quite perfectly square. It's a little bit longer in one way and not in the other, right? When you're dealing with rough cut lumber, it's going to be a little woogity. If you don't have a lumber pile with stickers in it to go and raid, probably your easiest way to get a chunk of 1x1 is to go to the garden center and look for some wooden tomato stakes. Okay, those will work great. Cut them into 3 to 4 inch lengths. You only need 1 inch to clamp to, so you've got the thickness of the board, your 1 inch to clamp to, and a little bit extra so that it doesn't get clumsy. Okay, so depending on what scrap of wood you're using for your base will determine how much tall you need this to be. Okay, how is that for some goodly English? How much tall you need this to be? What's that?
Little Dutchy.
Real goodly, real goodly, real goodly. Okay, so because this is a woogity piece, we're going to trace the actual dimensions of our stick. Always do this with rough cut. Okay? Because our pattern is good for a suggestion, but we need to actually cut what we're actually looking at. And because rough cut is usually not perfectly consistent along the whole length of it, you're going to want to individually trace each individual piece and then put them in a line in order so you know which one goes in which hole. Okay? If you have perfectly machined and planed, absolutely perfect one by one, you don't have to do that. You can go from a measurement. But we do because everything here is rough. This is a great place to use up scraps and use rough. So, now we're going to take a chisel, set it right in that line, and just give it a good, smart tap. Head's partially coming off of this hammer. Need to rehandle this one. Wish I knew a guy who's already made YouTube videos about handling tools.
I think you might know him.
I might know him?
Yeah.
Problem is, he's short on time. So we're not trying to chop all the way through with our first round. We're just setting the chisel down in, breaking the grain, and creating a nice stop cut that we'll go to later. So now we can just, with hand pressure, just kind of pop out the waste that we just removed. Okay? Make sure that's clear so that the board isn't rocking around. And we do it again. Now, if this was fine woodworking, you wouldn't want to chop all the way through from one side, because it will always split out on the back. Even with the sharpest chisel and the best, cleanest cutting wood, it will still chip out on the back. So if you were doing that, you would want to set up your pattern and index it in such a way that you have symmetrical marks on front and back, and chop it from both sides into the middle. Here, I do not care. So I'm just going to go tap at a time. I think that was through. Yep, that was through. Chop right straight through and not care if it's ugly on the back. We're making a jig, not art for the Metropolitan Museum. Okay, you see that does not take too long. There's a little bit to clean up there. It didn't even split through all that much on the back. That was good. Okay, so I've got a little corner here to clean up. You just probably, yep, there it goes, just some hand pressure. And then do a test fit. Perfect. So that's one peg. And then just cycle, rinse, repeat until you have all of your pegs in. Okay? Now, for glue, any glue, whatever glue you have handy is the right glue. Okay? So I put mine all together with just yellow wood glue because I have a giant supply of it and it's handy. You could use white school glue. Heck, you could even use like a milk casein paste for this. It's not that critical. This is way overkill in terms of having this peg supported by the sides of the wood. That's way overkill for what we're going to be doing. Okay, so you don't have to worry about the glue. Use just the cheapest, most readily available glue that you have, and it's right. So you just keep going along until you have all your pegs in, then you're ready to steam bend, and let's go look at that step. I hope that you're enjoying this content, and if you are, I would love to invite you to join our Patreon page and the community over there. The Patreon and that funding is super important for this channel as well as most YouTube channels. It just takes resources to do these things, to buy materials, to go on trips, to go interview people, to do activities, and we're trying to build and make the channel better in all of those categories. So we're super grateful for everybody who's already there. And if you would like to come and join the ranks of those folks, we have a lot of rewards for the folks who do join on the Patreon. We have a large repository of historic information on traditional skills that have been re-indexed and edited and produced in easy-to-print formats and formats that are easy to put into a page reader. And it's indexed by skill rather than all of the random ways that it was indexed in the past. So you could access what you want. We also have a lot of plans and patterns for various projects, like this shoulder bag that we're going to replicate here soon. The fur stretchers behind me are another example. And all of that library becomes an infinite access resource to you when you join the Patreon at any of the paid tiers, even at $1 a month. If you don't want to join that way, they can be purchased as individual downloads as well. And we're just so grateful for everybody who's there and wanted to invite you. So, hope to see you there, but I also hope you're joining this video, which we'll get back to right now. If you have a wood shop that's fully equipped with a nice steam box and you're prepared for this kind of steam bending, great, use that equipment. But if you don't have that, you can do this in a kitchen. So what I have here are 2 pots of water, and the slats that I'm going to steam bend for the backstays are underneath this wad of towels. Okay, so the towels are providing insulation, the steam's coming up. It takes a little longer this way because we're not cooking them as hot. But what I like to do for these thin slats is do them 20 minutes on one side, flip them underneath the towels without taking them out, and then do 20 minutes on the other side. These are ready to go to bend. When we bend them, we want to make sure that the bottom, which is going to be wetter and hotter than the top, even though this whole area is hot, the top of these towels are uncomfortable to touch. Okay, so they're very, very hot through. But the bottom is going to be hotter and wetter. So when we bend it, we're going to have the bottom up and then bend it out so that the bottom is around the outside of the curve, because that's what we're going to ask to stretch the most. Okay, so those are ready to go. Let's look at the forms. Here's our form all set up and ready to go, and here is one of the prototype stays. Now the first ones I did in 1/4 inch, and they're just a little bit more flexible than I want, but they did bend really, really well. How thick you want your wood will vary somewhat with what wood you're using. Okay, so if you have access to a lot of really nice hickory, anything over 1/4 inch is probably going to be overkill. If you want to use something like cedar, it's lighter, but it's also weaker and springier. So you're going to want to go 3/8 or maybe even a little bit more than 3/8. Okay, since these were just a little bit springier than I wish they were, I'm going to try 3/8 inch ash. If it works well, awesome, I'll use those. If not, I can always just fall back to the 1/4 inch ones because I know these work well. So what wood you have available is going to determine which one you actually use. This is easier to do if you have 2 people. So my beloved is going to come and put the clamps on while I hold the piece of wood. So I'm going to bring it, curve it with my hands, and we'll put one on the middle and then one on each end. And you'll see the advantage of doing this with square blocks because it's so easy to clamp to. So I'm going to go grab the piece, just let it roll. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. Good. Okay. that one, that grabbed. I need to get this one over here to get the end all the way in. Okay, the 3/8 is kind of pushing it a little bit. So now I can walk this one over here. You do have to work quick with this. That'll hold that well enough. I can reposition this one on the end a little bit. Okay. And now that all those are on, we can leisurely make some small adjustments. This one's holding well. This one on the side is not holding so well. So I'm going to move this over. Take that off. And now we can put a screw C-clamp, which have a higher holding pressure than the squeeze clamps do. That is just being stubborn. Last little corner. Okay. So we got it. This is definitely all that we would get in this piece of wood. So now we can take that off. We have some clamps to use for the other one. You want to leave these clamps on for a healthy 24 hours. Let it get all the way cool and all the way dry. So, let's look at our other form. Okay. Again, we're going to get things pre-positioned so that the openings are close. Get everything set out. So you have to work quick. And there's the extra. Okay. Are you ready?
Yes.
Yep, go. Okay, stop. Just get the other side. That's a big one. Right on that lump. You gotta go the other way. I got it. Just hold it there. Okay, that's close. Now, get that one in temporary. You can really cinch this one up. Oh, okay. It snapped right there. Yeah. I just want to show you this fracture here quick. This is the problem that we're having with all of the salvaged ash from the emerald ash borer. Ash is one of the fastest woods to, rot and get spalting and decay when it lays on the forest floor. So all of this salvaged ash has bad spots, and that is not how ash should fracture, right? Ash should pull splinters and rip when it's good intact wood. But since just about all of the wood that is still circulating around the market here in the Northeast is salvage because of the emerald ash borer problem, for bending purposes, this is getting to be a pretty big problem. It's getting hard to find ash that will tolerate a good strong bend. This is future editing me. As you can see, I'm pulling out a line of stitches here on this bottom piece of canvas. The reason is, when I first conceived of this pattern, my idea was to have the rope loop sewn into the bottom so that it could attach to the rope loop in the bottom of the pack itself. But having moved forward and gotten all of the innards attached to the pack itself, it's become very obvious that there's just not, it's just going to be too much material to deal with, right? It's not going to work. So I'm going to sew the bottom in canvas to canvas. It will still work, not a big deal. But I wanted to mention it because in this video where I'm talking about making these rope harness pieces, there's a couple places where I talk about making 3 loops, but in practice there's only going to be 2 loops because I'm abandoning this one. So I just wanted, before going into the rope work, I'll edit that out as best as I can, but sometimes you say a throwaway word in the middle of a sentence that can't be edited out without being awkward. So me ripping the stitches is the explanation of those awkward spots. Back to the video. We're going to get started making the rope harness for this. Now, like if you think about a cube, right, you have the edges around the bottom, edges around the top, and then the vertical corners. All of those edges are going to have a piece of rope in them, okay, and they're going to be all attached to each other. And then the backpack is going to get sewn around that harness so that the rope is taking the majority of the weight, and the canvas is kind of along for the ride, okay? If you look at how we've made our pieces, let me get the flap out of there. All of these tabs that we sewed in here are so that we can put the bottom loop of rope, sew that in like that, and then the ends, it'll get sewn in like that, so on and so forth all the way around. Then when it loops around, that will go in and get sewn into the front piece, okay? So what we're doing is we're making that harness. Now I've got 2 pieces. The top and the bottom are asymmetrical. Okay, so if we think about this, right, there's one piece across the bottom. Hang on. Did I grab the wrong rope? I did that and then grabbed the short one. Go. The top and the bottom are asymmetrical. So if we think about, right, this getting sewn into there, this getting sewn into there, and then allowance for the side piece, and allowance for the other side piece, okay? That is what's going to get connected into our loop, right, like that. And then the verticals will go on the corners and then connect to the top loop. So what we need to do is join this without a big nasty knot. So we're going to splice it. There's the 2 most common splices are the short and the long splice. The short splice is inherently stronger. However, it's very bulky. Not as bulky as a knot, mind you, but it's bulky. So the long splice was designed in the days of the wooden sailing ships to splice the rope with, on the order of 80% of the inherent strength of the unspliced rope, but not gain any width so that it can pass through the sheaves of a pulley. Okay, that's where this came from. So we're going to use the long splice. To start the long splice, and oh my gosh, this rope is such overkill in terms of just tensile strength for anything that we're going to put in a backpack, right? 80% of, losing 10% of so much overkill is still so much overkill. So we don't care about that. We just want this to lace in neat and tidy. Okay, so we start by unlaying the ends of the rope and nestling them right up against each other, just like that. Okay. Now, obviously, we're going to need to cut my tape markers off. They're valuable when you're cutting it, but they kind of get in the way when we actually go to do the splice. So for the bottom, our dimension from marker to marker, 61 inches. I need to hold this without letting it move as I take these markers off. Okay. 61 inches, and then to do the long splice, you need your tags to be at least 12 times the diameter of the rope. So for 3/8 inch rope, that's 4.5 inches, and I'm cutting these 5 inches, so we have plenty. Now the way we do the long splice is hold it in place, and what we're going to we're going to take two of these that are opposing pairs. Okay? And we're going to unwrap one. And then fill in that groove with the other. And this is why you can do this without thickening the rope. Because the piece we're splicing in, we're taking something out in its place. When we get to the end, we just tie an overhand knot. You want at least 4 or 5 full revolutions for each splicing piece. Okay? I'm going to take that one more revolution, actually. Still looking a little bit short. I just have to leave myself enough to tie the overhand knot. There we go. That's at least a little better. Switch. It wasn't laying flat, so I'm just switching which one went over and which one went under. There we go. That's better. So the first time I knotted that, it was just a little bit bulky, so it laid better when I switched which end I went across the top versus underneath the half hitch. Okay? So now we come in the opposite direction and do the same thing with another 2 yarns. Okay? One going out and then the other chasing it back in. Now we've done a whole video set on rope splicing here on the channel already. Link at the top of the screen. If you want a longer, more detailed explanation of what is all going on here, I would encourage you to watch that. Okay? So I'm going to trim these long ends just to get that out of the way so we can see what we're doing and don't goof up which thing we're connecting to which thing. Okay? Now here in the middle, we just make a half hitch. And pull it all snug. So that it lays together. And there we have our loop. Now I'll trim those, obviously. And then, where'd my other rope go? There's my other rope. This one, we're going to do the same procedure with, but it is shorter, and the inside dimension is 45 inches, because the top is a little bit shorter than the bottom. But while I'm giving you these dimensions, and this is written into the pattern, always go back to your piece and measure out exactly what you came up with in case you have any distortion, warping, or inaccurate cutting in your layout process. So never let words written on a page get in between you and first-hand data looking at the thing you're actually sewing. Okay? So measure this, that, this, and then that a second time. That is your inside dimension of this upper loop. Okay? So I'm going to get this done, and then we are going to tuck ends, and I'll show you how to do that. So what we're going to do is on each end, we're going to go over 1 and under 2. Now, you need some help to get the rope teased in. There's an official tool for this called a fid. But for small rope like this, we can just fit it through with an oversized crochet hook. Okay? Over 1, under 2, and then cut it off, leaving a little bit of excess. Okay? Next rope in line, it's going this direction. So we're going to go fit in from the other way. Over 1, under 2. A little awkward. There's also a thick yarn. Okay. And we'll cut it close, but not right at. So here, over 1, under 2. Pull it on through. The other thing I've used very successfully is, I don't have a fit at the moment, tool for rope work, is a piece of stiff wire bent in half. You just stick the loop through, hook your piece, and pull it out. Works quite well. Okay, over 1, under 2. And we'll work all the way along till all of these ends are tucked. We're looking at the uprights now. So again, this loop is going to get sewn into the bottom here, and these uprights are going to get sewn into the side like that. Okay? And that's what's going to unite this whole construction together. Now, at this stage, I want these to be able to slide a little bit and adjust so that we can, jimmy them around and get everything set the way we want it to in the final construction. So I'm doing a loop over connection rather than a solid 90-degree perpendicular splice. Okay? That way it can slide. And the particular splice I'm using here is called a chain splice. So this was used in the sailing ships to attach a rope to a chain without having, a big, large knot that would jam up in sheaves or jam in the rigging, okay? All these knots come from, the age of sail, and they're trying to move ropes around without getting stuff jammed up, weigh the devil up on some arm that some poor guy has to climb and fix while the ship's rocking back and forth, right? We don't want that. So here, it gives us some really nice, clean bits of rope work for making this internal harness in such a way that, that it will sew in nice and neat and clean. And so on this, we have the length of our diagonal, okay, which on this one, because of shrinkage, is 17 inches. By pattern, it's supposed to be 19 inches, okay? But we're just going ahead and finishing this. And then we need an extra 6 inches of length on each end. That's because it's based on the long splice, so we need our 5 inches to do the long splice portion, but then we also need an inch to go around the circumference of the rope we're attaching it to, okay? So we'll start by unlaying the ends, just as in the long splice. Okay. And now we're going to be asymmetrical in how we wrap this around. Okay. We've got 2 ends on one side and 1 on the other. So we will cut off our marking tape. Hopefully without bleeding on the project again. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to unwind this cord, just like in the long splice, and chase it with this, just like in the long splice. Okay. So one unwraps, the other chases. You want to make sure you get a nice, good, tight juncture. Yeah, that's pretty good. You really have to reef on that pretty good to get that tight. Okay, and we'll tie our half hitch. Okay. Now, this other end, we're going to wrap. We're going to go over this and under the next available turn. Again, pull it nice and tight. Okay. Make sure those are even. Now these we will tuck the same as in the other long splices, over 1, under 2. But I want to look at this one and show that really well in this section. Okay. We're going to do, that was our first tuck. Now we're going to go over 1, under 1, and tuck again without modifying anything. Okay. That's our second tuck. Make sure that we're staying square, that all of this is good. Because we are working with, what we just tucked under was this end that we, twisted back on itself, right? So we want to make sure we're not loosening anything down in there. Okay. Keep those symmetrical, same pressure. Now, those first 2 tucks are full width. If this was a thicker rope where we had 3 yarns, a 3-part yarn here, we would untwist 1 and do two more tucks, one with half the length, one with 2/3 of the thickness, and the last with 1/3 of the thickness. Since I only have 2 cords to unwrap, I'm going to do 2 full thickness and then 2 half thickness, because this is thinner rope. So whichever one is kind of more on the bottom, pull that aside. Now we're going to go over 1 and under 1, tuck the other half, okay, get it all nice, and then do the same, over 1, under 1. Gets real frayed out really quick. That's okay though. And do that. Okay? So again, if this was a thick rope, you would do full, 2/3, 1/3. We're doing full, half, because that's just accommodating the rope that we have. Then we will take each of these, over 1, under 2, okay, over 1, under 2. But you can see how our tucks from the long splice portion are going through the same space as our tucks from the other standing line. Getting caught on something in there. So it's important to taper that out to get a neat finish to our splice. And then just kind of work and pull and fuss it into a nice even shape. Okay, so we're going to do that twice each on 4 vertical ropes, and that will assemble the internal harness. There is the finished rope harness. You can see we've got all 4 corner lines attached to the top and the bottom piece with that loop splice that we demonstrated. So this will be sewn across the top like that. Then the bottom, which these ropes have quite a bit of memory, so it's wanting to twist on itself right now. Then the bottom will be sewn in along there, and each of these corner lines along the edges, like so. And this top will be just a little bit below the top of the pack. Along the corners and the bottoms, this will be completely encased, and it will be surface stitched onto the top. But that will still be plenty strong. This is crazy overkill. Now, this is going to do 2 things when it's all attached in. One is it's going to stiffen the pack, okay? And as it stiffens the pack, that's just going to help it hold its structure better. Again, this is an internal structure pack. So that's the first thing. The second thing it's going to do is allow these ropes to, take a lot of the tension of the weight of the materials pulling against the bottom. A lot of that will be distributed to these ropes. So the stitching and the canvas is not taking all of that stress and strain. Okay? And the third thing it's going to do, as we stitch through this whole assembly, okay, this is just kind of an engineering principle. Something has to bend before it breaks. Okay? So if you imagine a stitch, my right hand finger, imagine that as the stitch looping around some threads in the canvas. Okay? In order for that stitch to break the canvas, it has to pull those threads far enough away from their neighbors that they can break. Okay? So if you think about that, a stitch going through this whole assembly, it has to compress the rope enough to put enough tension on the canvas to break it. And that's not realistically possible in this assembly. So what we're doing is we're guaranteeing that if a seam fails, it does not fail because it ripped the canvas. It fails because it ripped a stitch. And just like when we talked in an earlier video about, why we chose to use this style of grommet, I want the stitching to fail before anything else fails because it's very easy to replace a stitch. Okay? So since we have the rope is the strongest component of this, the canvas is the second strongest component, and when the canvas is pulled against the rope, right, and we're pulling through this whole assembly, rather than just a stitch pulling on the cloth itself, that is stronger than either part by itself. So that leaves the stitching thread. We can now use a very strong stitching thread and still have the stitching thread be weaker than what it's stitched to. Okay? So that's the goal of this assembly, to make sure that when a seam fails, because everything fails, everything is impermanent, that it's the easy to replace stitch and not hard to patch canvas. There you go. We have all the special parts made for the pack. I hope you're enjoying this and will subscribe so you can see it through. I do want to mention again, this is an example of prototype by building. So this being the first prototype and full build out of this pattern. I haven't finalized drawing the pattern yet because I want to make sure everything's working and happy and cooperative in said pattern before I release it. But it will be released on our Patreon as soon as this series is finished. So I'd love to invite you to join us over there so that you can see when the pattern pops up if you'd like to build one of these packs for yourself. But we are so grateful for everybody who's on Patreon. They provide so much support for the channel, and I just want to thank you for being there. Either way, I hope you have a wonderful, blessed day, and we'll see you here next time at Old Ways Rising Farm.